Chicago, late winter. Midnight draped the city in a shroud of frost and shadow. Streetlights cast pale halos onto deserted sidewalks, their glow flickering like tired stars against the darkness. In an alley off West 43rd Street, Luca Greco moved with a predator's silence, a tall silhouette woven into the night. The air reeked of gasoline and fear. A man knelt on the wet pavement at Luca's feet, blood from a split eyebrow mixing with slush. Luca's gloved hand pressed a pistol under the man's chin. The metal was cold, Luca's voice colder. "This is for my mother," he said, each word measured and echoing off brick walls. The man's eyes widened with recognition and terror. He was a lieutenant from the rival Castellano family, one who, years ago, had planted the car bomb that killed Luca's mother. He had thought himself untouchable, hidden until tonight. Now his pleas for mercy came out in panicked, puffs of breath that hung in the frigid air. Luca's jaw clenched. He remembered the phone call on a rainy night 11 years ago. His mother's gentle voice suddenly cut off in an explosion, the smoke and screams that followed. The grief that twisted inside him then had never truly left. It lived in him, a coiled serpent of pain and vengeance. A single gunshot shattered the midnight silence. The lieutenant slumped, eyes blank, as a ribbon of smoke curled from Luca's gun barrel. The sound rang in Luca's ears longer than it took for the man's body to hit the ground. For a moment, Luca stood motionless, gun still aimed at the lifeless form. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, yet an empty hollowness spread in his chest. He had waited years to avenge his mother, but victory felt as cold and barren as the winter night. Sirens wailed in the distance. Someone might have heard the shot. Luca inhaled sharply, forcing down the tremor in his hands. He tucked the pistol beneath his coat and stepped back into the shadows, disappearing just as red and blue lights began to paint the alley walls. 2 blocks away, the city opened into a small park. Silent swings hung from icy chains, and a thin layer of snow crusted the patches of grass and concrete. Luca's polished shoes crunched over salt and frost as he made his way to a lone bench beneath a skeletal oak tree. Adrenaline still coursed through him, but with it came a wave of sorrow that nearly buckled his knees. He sank onto the bench. The night concealed the blood spatter on his cuff, but Luca could not hide it from himself. He stared at his trembling hands, recalling how his mother used to hold them, steady when he was a child terrified of thunder. Those same hands had just dealt death in the name of family and revenge. A gust of wind whipped through the park, biting through Luca's wool overcoat. He welcomed the cold. It felt like penance. High above the Chicago skyline, cut into the starless sky, monoliths of glass and steel, blinking with distant lights. In that moment, Luca had never felt more alone among the sleeping millions of the city. He lowered his face into his hands. No one had seen him execute the Castellano thug, but his conscience bore witness. What have I become? He wondered bitterly. A loyal soldier, a killer, a trapped soul, bound by duty to his uncle's Mafia empire, bound by vengeance to a cycle of bloodshed. His mother would barely recognize the man he'd become. His eyes burned, hot tears threatening despite the cold. Luca quickly swiped at them with the heel of his palm, angry at himself for this crack in his armor. Men like him did not cry, especially not in public, and definitely not over ghosts of the past. But grief is a thief. It strikes without warning, even in the heart of a hardened enforcer. In the stillness, a soft crunch of footsteps on snow reached Luca's ears. He stiffened and looked up, instincts primed for danger. But it was not a threat that emerged from the darkness. A small figure in a pink coat stood a few paces away, half illuminated by the weak glow of a nearby lamp. A child no older than 6 peered at him with wide, innocent eyes. Luca realized with a start that his face was damp. A tear had escaped after all. He hastily wiped it away, glancing around for a parent or guardian. Before he could speak, the little girl stepped closer. Her boots sank into a tuft of snow with each careful step. She clutched a threadbare stuffed rabbit in one mittened hand. Curly, dark hair framed a round face that was solemn beyond her years. "You're crying," she said softly. Her voice was high and clear in the hush of midnight. Luca opened his mouth, but no sound came out at first. He was stunned. He hadn't heard a child's voice directed at him in, he couldn't remember how long. Certainly no child had ever dared approach him like this, not with the aura of danger he knew he carried. Finally he managed, "I'm fine. You should go." The little girl shook her head, taking another step until she was right in front of him. Luca felt frozen in place, afraid any sudden move might scare her away, or worse, reveal the monster he believed himself to be. Her small face scrunched with concern. "Mister, are you hurt?" she asked. Her gaze flicked to his hands. One of them had a faint smear of blood along the knuckles, visible when he'd run his hands over his face. Luca quickly hid his hand in his coat pocket. "It's nothing," he said gently, forcing a smile that he hoped would reassure her. "It's late, little one. You shouldn't be out here alone." "I'm not alone," the girl replied. Matter-of-factly, "My mom's closing the diner." She pointed across the street, and Luca noticed a squat building with a faded neon sign reading, "Area's Diner," its interior lights still on. As if on cue, the diner's door swung open and a woman stepped out into the cold, flipping the sign to closed. She had a wool hat pulled low and a long coat, and from beneath the hat spilled waves of chestnut-brown hair. Even at a distance, Luca could sense the gentle grace in her movements as she locked up. That must be the girl's mother, he realized. He turned back to the child, mustering a soft chuckle. "Well, you shouldn't wander off. Your mom will worry." The girl hugged her stuffed rabbit closer to her chest and studied Luca with the frank, unblinking stare only a child could manage. "Then why are you sad?" Luca felt the question like an ache in his chest. He should have denied it, but something in this child's earnest eyes made lies catch in his throat. "Sometimes grown-ups just get a little sad," he murmured. "But I'll be okay." She seemed unconvinced. She tilted her head, brown curls bouncing. "My name's Nina. What's yours?" He hesitated. Everything about this was surreal. The quiet park. This tiny inquisitor breaking through his solitude. "Luca," he said at last, watching her breath form tiny clouds. "Hi, Luca." Nina gave a shy, warm smile that showed a missing front tooth. "It's nice to meet you, even if you're sad." Despite himself, the corner of Luca's mouth lifted. He felt some heavy knot inside him loosen slightly. "It's nice to meet you too, Nina." She inched closer, close enough that Luca could see her more clearly under the lamplight. Her eyes were a striking hazel green, bright with concern and innocence. In those eyes, Luca saw no fear, no judgment, only empathy. It was disarming. A sharp breeze gusted through the barren branches overhead. Nina shivered but didn't move away. She looked at Luca with a sudden resolve, as though making up her mind about something. Then she spoke the words that would alter the course of Luca's life in an instant. "Don't cry, mister. You can borrow my mom." Luca blinked. For a heartbeat, he was sure he'd misheard. "What?" he stammered, caught completely off guard. Nina nodded, her expression earnest and a bit hopeful. "If you're sad, maybe a mom hug will help. You can borrow my mom for a bit. She's really nice. I don't think she'd mind." In the space of a breath, Luca felt the world shift. He was a man steeped in violence and fear, but here was this child, offering the most precious thing she had, her mother's comfort to a stranger who looked lonely. It struck Luca like a lightning bolt of warmth and pain all at once. His throat worked, struggling for words. "That's very kind of you," he managed softly, voice strained. Behind Nina, the woman from the diner had noticed her daughter's absence and was striding quickly across the street, toward the park. "Nina," she called, worry threading through her voice. "Nina, sweetie, you can't run off like that." "Over here, Mom," Nina called back, bouncing on her toes. She turned to Luca and whispered conspiratorially, "She's coming. Don't be afraid. She gives the best hugs." Luca couldn't help but let out a breath of wry amusement at Nina's attempted reassurance. Afraid? He had faced down gunmen and knelt at the altar of violence without flinching. Yet the prospect of meeting this child's mother, of being seen in whatever broken state Nina had perceived, unnerved him. The woman reached them, slightly out of breath. "Oh my goodness, Nina," she murmured, dropping to her knees in front of her daughter. She cupped the girl's cheeks with gloved hands. "Honey, you know you can't just run away like that. You scared me." "I'm sorry," Nina said, her small face contrite. "But I was trying to help." She pointed toward Luca, who had risen politely from the bench. Only now did the woman look up at Luca. Her eyes were the same hazel green as Nina's, but tinged with caution as she took him in, a tall man in a dark overcoat, face partially shadowed by the dim light and the brim of his black fedora. Luca realized he must look suspicious, lurking alone in a park at midnight, and he silently cursed himself for potentially frightening them. The woman stood, placing Nina slightly behind her in a protective gesture. "I'm sorry if she bothered you," she said, her tone apologetic but firm. "She's very friendly with people." "She wasn't a bother at all," Luca replied quickly, raising his hands in a placating gesture. He saw now that the woman was younger than he initially thought, perhaps late 20s. Strands of her hair, chestnut streaked with warm honey hues, framed a delicate face flushed from the cold and the scare. Her eyes studied him, wary but not unkind. Nina tugged on her mother's coat. "I asked if he wanted to borrow you," she explained earnestly. A mix of confusion and embarrassment flickered across the woman's face. "Borrow me?" The girl nodded. He was sad and alone. "I thought maybe he needed a mom." "Hug." A startled silence fell between the three of them. The woman's cheeks turned a shade darker, and Luca felt heat rise to his own face. He cleared his throat, rushing to diffuse the awkwardness. "I'm all right, really. Nina just caught me in a moment. That's all." He attempted a reassuring smile, though he could still feel the damp streak of a tear he hadn't fully managed to wipe away. The woman gave her daughter a gentle, chiding look, though a tiny smile played on her lips. "Nina has a very big heart." She then met Luca's gaze once more. Something in her expression softened as she did. Perhaps she noticed the lingering grief in his eyes, or the way he hunched slightly as if carrying a heavy burden. "Are you sure you're okay?" Luca could have easily lied with practiced ease, yet looking at her so sincere and concerned for a stranger, he found he didn't want to. "Not entirely. It's been a long night," he admitted quietly, "but I'll be fine." Nina's mother studied him a moment longer. "It's far too cold to be out here at this hour," she said, an offering in her voice. "Our diner is still warm. I just closed up. But if you'd like a cup of coffee or cocoa before we really call it a night?" Luca hesitated. The easy answer was a polite refusal. He should decline and vanish back into the night like he always did. That was safest, for them and for him. Yet he felt strangely rooted to the spot. The idea of stepping into a warm, brightly lit diner and away from the darkness of this night was achingly tempting. And the kind invitation in her eyes, he hadn't seen that softness directed at him in a very long time. "That's very kind of you, Ms." He realized he didn't know her name. "Aria," she said with a small smile. "Aria Romano. And this little troublemaker is my daughter, Nina." "Luca Greco," he introduced himself, inclining his head. He carefully omitted any titles or affiliations, just his first and last name, which thankfully Aria showed no sign of recognizing. A good sign. She likely wasn't familiar with Mafia family rosters. Aria extended her hand for a friendly shake. Luca removed his glove to take it, hoping she wouldn't notice the faint scar across his knuckles or the slight tremor still there. Her hand was cold from the winter air, but her grip was warm and sure. "It's nice to meet you, Luca," she said, and he almost believed the gentle warmth in her tone. Nina beamed up at both of them, clearly pleased with herself. "See? I told you, Mom." She tugged on Aria's hand. "He can come to the diner, right?" "For cocoa?" Aria chuckled softly. "If Mr. Greco would like to." "Sure." Luca found himself nodding before his mind had fully caught up. "Only if it's not too much trouble. I wouldn't want to impose." "No trouble at all," Aria insisted. "The door's already open and the coffee's still fresh. We were just about to head upstairs. I have an apartment above the diner, but we can spare a few minutes." Her kindness was as disarming as Nina's. Luca felt an unfamiliar bashfulness as he fell into step with mother and daughter, walking back toward the glowing neon sign of Aria's diner. The child skipped ahead, humming a Christmas tune slightly off-key, despite it being weeks past the holidays. Aria walked beside Luca, a respectful foot of distance between them. But he could feel the subtle gravity of her presence drawing him in from the cold. He dared a glance at her as they crossed the street under a halo of streetlight. Her profile was elegant yet strong, a quiet determination in the set of her jaw even when she smiled down at Nina. This woman had the air of someone who had weathered storms but still found the strength to be gentle. They reached the diner's entrance. Aria unlocked the door and pushed it open, jangling a small bell overhead. Warmth and the scent of sugar and brewed coffee spilled out, wrapping around them. Luca realized how frozen he truly was. A shudder ran through him as the heat embraced his body. Inside, the diner was a cozy throwback to simpler times. Checkered floors, red vinyl booths, and a long counter with chrome stools. Most of the lights were off except a few low lamps, but it felt welcoming. On one wall, above a booth, hung a framed photograph of a broad-shouldered, middle-aged man in a suit shaking hands with a smiling younger woman. Perhaps local customers or family friends, Luca guessed absently. Arya guided them to the counter. "Have a seat." "Coffee or cocoa?" she asked over her shoulder as she moved behind the counter, tying on a half-apron she'd grabbed from a hook. Luca slid onto a stool, careful to keep his bloodied cuff hidden under the bar. Nina hopped onto the stool beside him, swinging her short legs energetically. "Cocoa, please," the girl chirped, then looked at Luca expectantly. He felt a foreign lightness seeing her excitement. "Cocoa sounds perfect," he said quietly. In truth, he couldn't recall the last time he'd had a simple cup of hot cocoa. It must have been when his mother was alive. She used to make it with a dash of cinnamon, whenever Chicago winters got especially harsh. Arya smiled, and for a moment it banished the lingering shadows in Luca's mind. "2 cocos coming right up," as she busied herself steaming milk and stirring in chocolate from behind the counter. Luca allowed his gaze to wander. The diner's emptiness, at this late hour, made it easy to imagine. It filled with daytime life, the clatter of dishes, laughter of patrons, perhaps Arya bustling about pouring coffee with a bright smile. It was a vision of normalcy that felt worlds away from Luca's life. Nina tapped the counter to get his attention. She was studying him with a serious expression. "Are you feeling better now, Luca?" she asked softly. Luca hadn't realized it until she asked. But yes, something in him did feel lighter. "I think I am," he said, and found he meant it. The girl grinned, satisfied with that answer. "Told you Mom could help." Before he could answer, Arya set 2 steaming mugs before them. A rich chocolate aroma wafted up. She'd even added little marshmallows on top, half melted into foamy peaks. "Careful. It's hot," she warned, as Nina eagerly wrapped her hands around her mug. Luca cradled his own mug and just inhaled for a moment. The scent triggered a cascade of memories, his mother laughing in their old kitchen, snow collecting on the windowsill, a cinnamon stick stirring a pot of cocoa. The ache of those recollections was there, but the warmth of the cup in his hands and the gentle presence of these strangers made it bearable. Arya leaned on the counter across from them, her eyes studying Luca openly now, though not unkindly. "Rough night?" she asked. Luca blew on his cocoa, considering how to answer. "She deserved some truth, at least." "You could say that," he replied quietly. "Sometimes the weight of everything just catches up." That was as much as he could safely admit. Arya nodded as if she understood completely. "I have those days too, when it feels like the world's been set on my shoulders and I didn't even realize it until I'm about to collapse." Her candidness surprised him. "And what do you do then?" he asked, drawn in. She smiled wryly. "I make a cup of tea, hug my little girl, and remind myself that I've survived every bad day up to now. Odds are I'll survive this one, too." She reached over and gently brushed a crumb off Nina's chin. The girl had already bitten into a cookie. Arya apparently gave her along with the cocoa. Luca found himself smiling. "That's a good philosophy." Arya shrugged lightly. "Some days are harder to believe it than others, but we do what we can, right?" There was a flicker in her eyes, of sorrow or memory. Luca couldn't tell. That hinted she too carried burdens. He wondered what hardships might trouble a woman like her, who seemed to radiate kindness. Perhaps she was a widow. He saw no ring on her finger. Or maybe just the struggles of running a business and raising a child alone. He wouldn't pry. It wasn't his place. They sipped their drinks in a comfortable silence for a moment. Nina hummed happily between bites of her cookie. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, but inside was a small haven of warmth and quiet companionship. Luca allowed himself to savor it. Just a few minutes of peace, he bargained silently with the universe. Then I'll go back out into the cold where I belong. As if reading his mind, Arya spoke up, her tone gentle. "It's none of my business, but if you ever do need someone to talk to, sometimes a listening ear can help." She offered a sympathetic smile. "We're practically strangers, I know, but sometimes that makes it easier." Luca was at a loss for words. The earnest offer of understanding from a stranger. It was more than he ever expected. He felt an urge to tell her something, anything real about himself, if only to not squander her kindness. But how could he begin to explain the darkness in his life? He settled on a small slice of truth. "I lost someone important to me, a long time ago. Some nights it just hits harder than others. Arya's eyes softened. I'm sorry, she said simply. And he could tell she meant it deeply without even knowing his story. Losing someone. It never fully goes away, does it? No, it doesn't, Luca whispered, his gaze fixed on the swirling cocoa in his mug. Nina, listening quietly, laid her small hand on top of Luca's where it rested on the counter. Her fingers were sticky with melted marshmallow and chocolate crumbs. The gesture was innocent and instinctive, yet profoundly consoling. Luca felt a lump in his throat as he gently turned his palm upward to squeeze her tiny hand in thanks. A moment later, Nina yawned, the excitement of the night finally wearing down the little girl's energy. Arya chuckled. All right, my little helper. It's way past your bedtime. Nina rubbed her eyes. Do we have to go, Mom? I want to make sure Luca's okay. Arya brushed a tender hand over her daughter's curls. We do. Mr. Luca will be okay, I promise. We've done what we can for tonight. Luca nodded, finishing the last sweet sip of his cocoa. He didn't want this brief respite to end, but he knew he couldn't linger. He was dangerous company whether they realized it or not. Already the fact that he'd given his full name nagged at him. If Arya read the news, she might recall the Greco family name associated with organized crime, but given her calm, she likely hadn't made any such connection. He stood as Arya took their empty mugs and set them aside. Nina had already slid off her stool and wandered to the coat rack by the door, dragging her little feet. Thank you, Luca said softly. For everything. You didn't have to. Arya waved off his gratitude with a gentle smile. I wasn't about to leave someone out in the cold who might need a friend. And clearly, Nina took a liking to you. Nina was struggling to pull on her tiny mittens. Luca stepped over and helped guide her second mitten over her small hand, earning a drowsy smile from the child. Will you come back, Luca? She asked through another yawn. He looked at her tender, hopeful face and felt something stir in his heart, something like hope mingled with regret. Maybe, he said quietly. If it's all right with your mom, I could stop by for a coffee sometime. Arya had come from behind the counter, turning off the last of the lights. She gave Luca a nod, her eyes reflecting the street lamp glow through the window. You're welcome to anytime. We're open from 6 in the morning to 8 at night, except Sundays. Mom makes the best pancakes in town, Nina boasted sleepily, leaning into her mother's side. I'll definitely have to try those, Luca replied warmly. They stepped out into the night once more. The wind had died down a little, leaving the air crisp and silent. Luca held the door for them, then let it swing shut, locking it at Arya's request. She pocketed her keys and guided Nina toward a side stairwell that presumably led up to their apartment. For a moment, Luca lingered on the sidewalk. He suddenly felt uncertain. Did he shake Arya's hand again? Bid farewell with a simple goodnight? Nothing felt adequate to express what this chance encounter meant to him. Arya seemed to sense his hesitation. She offered her hand once more. When Luca clasped it, she placed her other hand over his in a gesture of fondness that took him by surprise. It was truly a pleasure to meet you, Luca. I hope we'll see you again. Her eyes held his, and in that gaze, Luca saw genuine kindness and a spark of connection that warmed him more than the cocoa had. He found himself momentarily at a loss, simply basking in her steady presence. I hope so too, he replied, his voice a little rough. Good night, Arya. Good night, Nina. Good night, Nina chirped already halfway up the stairs, her little rabbit toy hanging from her arm. Arya squeezed Luca's hand gently before releasing it. Good night, Luca. Take care of yourself, all right? He nodded, unable to keep a slight smile from his lips. I will. Thank you, Arya. With a final exchanging of smiles, she turned and ascended the stairs with her daughter, their figures soon disappearing into the shadows above. The stairwell door closed with a distant thud. Luca remained standing under the street lamp for a few seconds, staring at the now dark diner sign and the empty steps. He felt an extraordinary reluctance to leave this spot, as if by staying he could hold on to the warmth a little longer. Finally, with a deep breath that misted in the cold air, Luca tore himself away. He tugged his fedora lower over his brow and started down the sidewalk into the night. The city was still and silent, but inside his chest, something quiet and unfamiliar glowed. Hope. Or maybe the memory of kindness. His world remained dangerous and complicated. He knew that keenly. Yet tonight a little girl's compassion and a woman's gentle humanity had cut through the gloom. Luca had come to that park bench with blood on his hands and despair in his heart. He left it feeling, for the first time in ages, like he was not just a Mafia's right-hand killer, but a man who might still have some goodness left in him. He would see them again. He wasn't sure why he felt that so certainly, but as he vanished back into the city's darkness, Luca silently vowed it to himself. He would find a way to see Arya and Nina again, if only to thank them properly for giving a lonely soul a moment of light. The next morning, sunlight glinted off the glass high-rises as Chicago stirred to life. But in a quiet suburb beyond the downtown bustle, an opulent mansion housed a far darker awakening. Luca arrived at the Greco estate just after dawn, having scarcely slept. His mind was still tangled with thoughts of Arya and Nina, a stark contrast to the grim business that no doubt awaited him inside. 2 suited guards at the iron gates nodded respectfully as he passed. They knew Luca well. Everyone in Don Carmine Greco's circle did. He was the Don's favored nephew, the right-hand man who carried out orders with unwavering efficiency. The loyalty between uncle and nephew ran deep, forged in blood and loss, and Luca's reputation within the family was second only to the Don himself. Inside, the mansion was a blend of old-world elegance and modern luxury. Marble floors gleamed, and ornate chandeliers cast a warm glow over mahogany furniture. Luca crossed the foyer, passing a few of the family's capos who murmured greetings. He offered terse nods in return. There was an informal meeting being held in the study this morning, a debrief on recent business, including the ongoing feud with the Castellano family. As Luca entered the study, the low hum of conversation quieted. Don Carmine sat at the head of a long table. He was in his late 50s, hair silver at the temples but still black elsewhere. A broad-shouldered man whose presence dominated the room despite his calm, almost grandfatherly posture. Looks were deceiving. Carmine Greco's dark eyes could turn to steel in an instant. "Luca," Don Carmine said, a faint smile of approval tugging at his lips. "Punctual as always." "Zio," Luca replied, using the Italian for uncle, as he took a seat to Carmine's right. Around the table sat several men of varying ages, lieutenants and advisors. On Carmine's left sat Marco Greco, Luca's younger brother. Marco's jaw tightened subtly when Luca entered. A flicker of something like resentment passed over his face before he masked it with a smirk. Marco offered a lazy salute. "Good morning, brother. Busy night, I hear." Luca glanced at him sharply, unsure if Marco somehow knew of his late-night sojourn, or of the blood Luca had spilled in that alley. "Something like that," Luca replied evenly. Don Carmine cleared his throat, drawing all attention. "Let's get to it. We lost another runner on the docks last week. The Castellanos intercepted a shipment of ours. 3rd one this month." His voice hardened, rumbling with displeasure. "They think we're weak, that they can carve up this city and take what's ours." A murmur of anger went around the table. The rivalry between the Grecos and the Castellanos had escalated over the past year into open conflict. It was about territory and money. The Grecos controlled a lucrative underground casino operation and various unions, while the Castellanos were muscling in to dominate the shipping docks and narcotics trade. But it was also about blood, vendettas that stretched back years on both sides. Luca spoke up, his tone measured. "I took care of one of their captains last night, Franco Bianchi." He didn't elaborate further, in front of the others, that Franco was the man responsible for his mother's murder. Carmine would know it had been his sister who died in that explosion. But that personal detail remained, unspoken in this business context. A satisfied murmur passed among the men. Carmine's hand fell on Luca's shoulder in a rare public show of affection. "Good, one less snake in the grass. My sister's soul will rest a little easier." Don's eyes glinted with cold pride. Marco leaned forward, fingers drumming on the tabletop. "Franco was a small fish," he said, feigning nonchalance. "Killing him might scratch an itch, but it won't stop the Castellanos from coming for our shipments. They hit us again just days ago." There was a challenge in Marco's tone, as if implying that Luca's efforts, however loyal, weren't enough. Luca narrowed his eyes at his brother. At 26, Marco was 3 years Luca's junior and far less disciplined. Marco had always chafed under Luca's shadow within the family, and Luca suspected his brother's taste for power exceeded his patience to earn it. Every hit to their organization destabilizes them, Luca replied coolly. Franco's death will sow chaos in their ranks for a time. That buys us an opening. Maybe, Marco shrugged, then turned to Carmine. Or perhaps it's time to reconsider our strategy. Zio, all this tit-for-tat bloodshed, it's bad for business. The police are sniffing around everywhere. Our own men are getting jumpy. There might be another way to deal with the Castellanos, something more diplomatic. A heavy silence fell. The suggestion of diplomacy, with their enemies, made a few capos shift, uneasily in their chairs. Luca felt a spike of anger flare in his chest. Diplomacy? After they'd murdered countless Greco allies, after they'd killed his mother. Carmine's expression darkened, confirming Luca's own sentiments. Diplomatic? He repeated, voice dangerously soft. You mean bow and scrape to that upstart Vincent Castellano? Offer him a slice of what I built so he'll leave us be? The Don's hand curled into a fist on the table. No, they drew first blood. They'll get none of our business, and certainly no peace, until one of our families is ground to dust. Marco lifted his hands in a placating gesture, but Luca caught the flash of frustration in his brother's eyes. Of course, Zio. I'm only concerned about our men. Morale is low. Some are saying this war might destroy both families if it keeps on. Don Carmine bristled, leaning forward. And which men are saying this exactly? Just whispers I've heard, Marco said quickly, avoiding naming anyone. All I know is constant revenge. It can consume us. Luca couldn't hold his tongue. Revenge is what keeps our family safe, he said, voice clipped. If we let a single slight go unanswered, the rival will see it as weakness and move in further. Blood for blood is the only language they understand, Carmine nodded approvingly at Luca's words. But Marco's eyes flicked between Luca and the Don with a thinly veiled bitterness. As always, dear brother, your zeal is commendable, Marco said, a sneer curling his lip. Enough, Carmine interrupted, silencing any further bickering. He fixed Marco with a hard stare. We all mourn the toll, nephew. But mark me. Anyone under my roof who even considers making nice with those Castellano bastards will answer to me. This family stands united, or it falls. Marco lowered his gaze. Yes, Zio, he murmured. Carmine exhaled through his nose and surveyed the table, his anger subsiding back into cool authority. Now on to other business. Carlo, how's the situation with the union boss? As the meeting moved on to more routine matters, Luca tried to focus. But his mind wandered against his will, replaying fragments of last night that had nothing to do with Mafia business. Nina's earnest smile, Aria's gentle voice offering an open ear, the warmth of that tiny diner. He fidgeted with the cuff of his shirt, feeling the dried bloodstain from the earlier violence. In the cold light of morning, it felt even more jarring. Last night, stepping into Aria's world had been like entering a different universe. One where people solved their pain with kindness and cocoa, not bullets. Luca? Don Carmine's voice cut into his thoughts. Luca blinked and straightened in his chair. Yes, Don? Carmine studied him with a perceptive gaze. I was saying, it's time we remind everyone whose city this is. Show of force. I want you to coordinate a raid on that warehouse by the docks tonight, where the Castellanos stash their arms. Send a clear message. It was a straightforward order, the kind Luca normally followed without hesitation. But for a heartbeat, he faltered. A raid tonight meant more blood, more violence spiraling between the families. He thought of Aria's father, whom she said had been killed trying to stop such endless cycles of retribution. Still, he nodded. Consider it done. Satisfied? Carmine adjourned the meeting, instructing everyone to prepare for various tasks. The capos filed out, leaving Luca, Marco, and the Don alone for a moment. Carmine reached for a crystal decanter on the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of amber whiskey. He offered one to Luca, who accepted. None for Marco, which the younger brother noticed with a flash of annoyance. To family, Carmine toasted quietly, clinking his glass against Luca's. Luca echoed the toast and took a sip, the liquor burning down his throat. His uncle gave him a fond, almost paternal look. Your father would be proud of you. Luca, you honor our name with your dedication. Luca inclined his head humbly, though inside guilt prickled. If his father were alive and not rotting in prison on a life sentence, would he truly be proud? Or horrified at what his sons had become? Luca couldn't be sure. Carmine's gaze sharpened slightly as he regarded his nephew. You seem Troubled today, Luca. More than usual. Before Luca could answer, Marco let out a short laugh. Perhaps my big brother is finally realizing there's more to life than death and duty? Luca bristled, shrugging off the concern laced with malice in Marco's tone. I'm fine, he stated firmly to his uncle, ignoring Marco's jibe. Just didn't sleep well. The Don nodded slowly, not entirely convinced. He patted Luca's shoulder. Get some rest if you can. Tonight's work will require a clear head. Then he turned and strode out of the study, a bodyguard falling into step behind him. As soon as Carmine was gone, Marco stepped closer to Luca, arms folded. Careful, Fratello, he said in a low voice, using the Italian for brother. Your head was in the clouds back there. If you keep spacing out, Zio will start to wonder what's distracting you. Luca bristled, shrugging off the concern laced with malice in Marco's tone. I could say the same to you, suggesting peace with the Castellanos. Have you lost your mind? You're lucky he didn't throw you out of the family for that. Marco's eyes flickered, with something icy. Not all of us have the luxury of being the golden boy. One misstep from me, and yes, I'd be out. Or worse. But you can do no wrong in his eyes. You know that's not true, Luca muttered, though he knew Carmine did favor him strongly. It wasn't just nepotism. Luca had earned it with years of proven loyalty and competence. Still, he often wished he and Marco could be closer rather than rivals under the same roof. Marco gave a thin smile. Whatever you say, just watch yourself. A distracted soldier gets shot. With that parting shot, he turned on his heel and left Luca standing alone in the study. Luca exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Marco's remark held a warning, but also a truth. Luca's distraction could indeed be deadly in their world. He had to get his head straight, at least externally, even as his inner thoughts churned. As he left the Greco estate, Luca's mind strayed again to Aria. The logical part of him insisted that last. Night was an anomaly, a brief respite he had no right to experience again. Yet a quieter voice, one that had grown in the warmth of Aria's diner, whispered, You could have more than this. More than blood and fear. That voice was dangerous. Luca tried to silence it as he climbed into his black sedan. But even as he pulled away from the mansion, he found himself taking a detour, the car almost steering itself, through the streets of Chicago toward a neighborhood he normally had no business in during broad daylight, the neighborhood of Aria's diner. Luca didn't immediately pull up to the curb in front of Aria's diner, not wanting to appear too eager. Instead, he parked half a block away and collected himself for a moment. It was mid-morning by now, and the diner would be in full swing with breakfast patrons. Through the large front windows, he could see a few customers at the counter and families in booths, enjoying their Friday breakfasts. A far cry from the empty midnight refuge it had been hours ago. He stepped out of his car and shrugged on a more casual coat he'd grabbed. From home, a charcoal pea coat. That was less conspicuous than his usual black wool overcoat. Luca told himself this was simply to blend in, but perhaps a part of him also wanted to present a softer image than the Mafia enforcer in a dark suit. He left his gun locked in the glove compartment, a deliberate choice that felt oddly liberating. When he entered the diner, the little bell on the door jingled. The warmth and smell of frying bacon and coffee enveloped him. For a second, Luca just stood there taking in the cozy normalcy. A man in a hard hat chatting with a waitress over a refill. Two elderly ladies sharing gossip at a corner table. A mother cutting pancakes for a toddler in a high chair. It was a tableau of ordinary life, the kind that happened every day in thousands of places. But it felt extraordinary to Luca, who had been kept on the outskirts of such peaceful scenes for so long. Seat yourself anywhere. Came a familiar, lilting voice that cut off abruptly. Aria had looked up from behind the counter, mid-sentence, to find Luca at the door. A surprised smile dawned on her face. She wore a pale blue waitress dress with a white apron, an outfit that on anyone else might seem plain. But on her it glowed with wholesome charm. Luca felt a warmth in his chest at seeing her again. He tipped his head in greeting. Good morning. I hope I'm not intruding. Aria shook her head, coming around the counter. Not at all. We're open for another hour before the lunch break. I didn't think I'd see you so soon. There was a gentle tease in her voice, balanced by genuine pleasure at his appearance. He found himself a bit at a loss for what to do with his hands or how to stand. It had been so easy talking to her in the quiet of last night. Now, With a daytime crowd around and without the veil of sorrow making him vulnerable, he felt almost shy. "I was in the neighborhood," he managed to say casually. "Thought I'd try those famous pancakes and say hello to my new friend, Nina, if she's here." At the mention of her name, a little head popped out from behind Arya. Nina had been coloring in a corner booth, and now she slid out and came bounding up. "Luca!" she chirped excitedly. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around Luca's legs in a hug. A few patrons glanced over, smiling at the child's exuberance and the unlikely recipient. Luca's heart melted as he carefully patted Nina's back. "Hello, Bunny," he said softly, using the nickname that sprang naturally to mind, given she still clutched that floppy-eared, stuffed rabbit. Nina giggled and stepped back. "You came. Mom, can I sit with Luca while he eats? I finished my drawing." Arya laughed under her breath, a sound like warm honey. "If Mr. Luca doesn't mind an assistant pancake taster, I'm sure we can arrange that." "I'd be honored," Luca said, eyes crinkling in a real smile. Arya led him to an empty booth by the window. As he slid in, she handed him a menu, though added, "Unless you want to skip right to the pancakes." "How's specialty, after all?" "Pancakes, definitely," he confirmed. He wasn't particularly hungry. His stomach was fluttering with nerves he refused to admit were nerves, but he'd promised Nina, and he found he genuinely wanted to taste something Arya had made. "Excellent choice," Arya winked, jotting it down on her order pad though she didn't need to. "One stack of my special ricotta pancakes coming right up." "Coffee?" "Yes, please," said Luca. With that, she bustled off to the kitchen window to relay the order, leaving Luca and Nina alone at the booth. The little girl immediately slid in opposite him, pushing aside her crayons. She gazed up at Luca with unabashed delight. "Mom was happy last night after you left," Nina said conversationally. "She was?" Luca asked, adjusting the sugar dispenser absent-mindedly on the table. Nina nodded, swinging her legs. She had a smile. "I think she was glad you came by. Mom doesn't smile like that too much. Except with me." She said it matter-of-factly, dipping a finger in the condensation on his water glass to draw shapes. A pang of empathy went through Luca. He wondered what sorrows Arya carried, that Nina was perceptive enough to notice her smiles had become rare. "Your mom is a special lady," he replied. "Yep, the best." Nina grinned, then leaned forward, whispering, "Did the cocoa help you? You seemed happier when you left." Luca remembered the cautious hope he'd felt walking away the previous night. It had carried him through the morning. "It did help," he answered gently. "You and your mom helped a lot." Nina beamed proudly, as if she'd accomplished a grand mission. Arya soon returned with a steaming mug of coffee for Luca and a small glass of milk for Nina, to wash down the pancakes, she said. She had other tables to tend to as well, so she left them to chat intermittently while working the room. Even busy, she would glance over at Luca and Nina with a radiant smile that made Luca's chest ache pleasantly. When the pancakes arrived, they were golden and fluffy, topped with fresh berries and a dusting of powdered sugar. Nina immediately stole a forkful from Luca's plate with a giggle. "Quality testing," she proclaimed. Luca feigned outrage, then chuckled. He savored a bite. "These are incredible," he praised. The flavor was rich with vanilla and something slightly tangy sweet. "Best pancakes I've ever had, honestly." Arya, passing by with a coffee pot for another table, shot him a grateful smile that lit her eyes. He realized she likely took great pride in her cooking. Seeing his genuine appreciation clearly pleased her. Between bites, the conversation flowed easily. Nina chattered about her day, her stuffed rabbit, named Mr. Hops, and the stray cat that sometimes hung around the alley. Luca listened, amused and enchanted by her 6-year-old worldview, where even small things like a coloring book page could be an adventure. At one lull, Arya came by to refill Luca's coffee and actually sat down beside Nina for a moment, taking a brief break. "So, Luca," she said, resting her chin in her palm, "I hope Chicago's treating you all right so far." "It has its ups and downs," he replied. "This morning counts as a definite up." She laughed softly. "You're smooth, aren't you?" He raised his hands innocently. "Just honest." Arya regarded him with that same kind curiosity as the night before. "If you don't mind me asking, what line of work are you in? I know most of the breakfast regulars around here by face if not by name, and you, sir, are not one of them." There was a teasing note in her voice. but also genuine interest. Luca had expected this question eventually. He'd prepared a half-truth. I work in security and logistics for a family business, he said. It wasn't entirely a lie, organizing shipments of questionable goods and providing security through intimidation was a great deal of what he did. But phrased like that, it sounded benign. Arya nodded, accepting that answer easily. That sounds like demanding work. She didn't pry further, perhaps sensing it was a topic he preferred lightly touched. And you run this whole place, Luca said, turning the focus to her. That must be a lot for one person. It keeps me busy, she admitted, glancing around the diner. Early mornings, late nights sometimes. But it's mine and it keeps a roof over our heads, and Nina gets all the pancakes she could ever want, Arya affectionately nudged her daughter, who was busy licking a bit of syrup off her finger. A shadow of pride and sorrow passed over Arya's face. My father actually taught me most of these recipes, she said. Cooking was his passion. He dreamed of opening a restaurant or bakery one day. Never got the chance, so I suppose this is me carrying that torch, Luca. Notice she said was and never got the chance. He tread carefully. I'm sure he'd be proud of what you've built. A gentle smile touched her lips. I hope so. He was a good man. Always tried to take care of people. We had a lot of folks in our old neighborhood who were struggling. He used to say, if you feed people, if you break bread with them, they stop thinking of you as stranger or enemy. You become friends. Her eyes grew distant with memory. What happened to him? If you don't mind me asking, Luca said softly. Arya's gaze lowered to the table, tracing an invisible pattern on the formica. He died when I was in college, caught up in a conflict that wasn't even his, trying to help broker peace between some dangerous men. She swallowed, and Luca could see the old hurt flicker in her eyes. After he was gone, Mom and I left that neighborhood. It had too many ghosts for us. I struck out on my own eventually, found this place. Made it my own haven. Luca's chest tightened. The pieces clicked together. Her father had been killed by the Mafia. Perhaps not the Grecos directly, but likely in a crossfire or vendetta similar to the one Luca lived daily, and he had been someone who wanted peace. A rush of conflicting feelings flooded. Luca, anger at the faceless criminals who caused her pain, guilt by association, because he was one of those dangerous men in someone else's eyes, and admiration for the strength it took. Arya to survive that and create a haven like this diner. I'm sorry, he murmured sincerely, for your loss. Your father sounds like he was a remarkable man. Arya looked up and met his gaze. Thank you, he was. I miss him every day. There was a sheen of tears she quickly blinked away. To lighten the mood, she forced a small chuckle. And here I am, unloading my life story on a customer. Sorry, that got heavier than I intended. Hey, Luca said, catching her eyes with a gentle intensity. I meant what I said last night. Sometimes talking to someone helps. I'm glad you told me about him. Arya held his gaze. A delicate pink tinge on her cheeks at his earnest attention. A second stretched where neither looked away. Luca felt the busy diner fading around them. The clatter of dishes and hum of chatter muffled as he lost himself. In the warmth of her hazel green eyes. Mom, can I get more milk? Nina piped up, oblivious to the charged moment between the adults. Arya blinked, breaking the spell, and laughed lightly. Sure, sweetie. I'd better get back to work. She stood, smoothing a few stray wisps of hair back into her bun. Luca, I'll leave you two to finish up. I've got the tab covered, by the way. Consider it thanks for being such a good influence on my daughter. Luca opened his mouth to protest paying, but Arya gave him a playful warning look that brooked no argument. Thank you, he acquiesced, smiling. As Arya walked away, Luca realized his heart was beating faster. The connection he felt with her was undeniable and growing with each passing minute. Her story about her father struck so close to his own wounds. He yearned to tell her that his mother, too, had been taken by violence, not unlike what took her father. But he stayed silent, afraid such revelations would only cause her more pain, or raise questions he couldn't safely answer. After breakfast, Luca lingered a little longer, letting Nina show him her crayon drawings. One depicted 3 figures holding hands under a sunny sky. Nina herself, Arya, and one more figure that looked suspiciously like Luca, drawn in a black coat and hat. He felt a pinch of emotion seeing that she'd included him. That's me? He asked, pointing. Nina nodded vigorously. Yes! See, I gave you a smile. You seemed sad. so I wanted you to be happy in the picture." Luca swallowed hard. "It's wonderful. I love it," he said, and meant it with all his heart. Eventually, he had to tear himself away and head back to his own duties. He promised Nina he'd visit again soon. As he left, Arya came to the door to wave. "Don't be a stranger, Luca," she said. "Take care, Arya," he replied, with a warmth in his voice he hadn't felt in years. Over the next week, Luca found himself returning to Arya's diner every chance he got. True to his word, he wasn't a stranger. Dropping in for a late lunch one day, and early morning coffee the next, he told himself it was to make sure Arya and Nina were safe. But it wasn't the whole truth. He simply craved their presence. Each visit was an island of normalcy amidst the stormy seas of his other life. He helped fix a wobbly stool at the counter one afternoon, tightening the bolts with nimble competence while Arya joked that maybe he should be the handyman around here. Another evening, he walked Arya and Nina to their door upstairs, carrying a heavy bag of flour for her, and stayed a while as Nina insisted he join a quick game of Go Fish. He lost spectacularly to the gleeful child, and the sound of Arya's laughter at his exaggerated look of defeat was more rewarding than any victory. Bit by bit, Luca felt the walls around his heart lowering. He hadn't told them everything, far from it, but in those moments at the diner or escorting them home, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to be part of their world fully, to have perhaps a family of his own that wasn't bound by crime and fear, but reality was never far. Late one night, about 2 weeks after that first encounter in the park, Luca's two worlds collided in a way he dreaded. It was almost midnight. The diner had closed at 8 as usual, and Arya and Nina were asleep upstairs. Luca had stayed away that day, occupied with business, namely, planning the warehouse raid with Carmine's crew. The raid had gone down hours ago and succeeded. Their men torched a Castellano arms cache, and though Luca's soul felt heavier with each escalation, outwardly he did what was expected. He found himself driving by the diner on his way home, an unconscious detour. Perhaps he just wanted to pass by and assure himself that quiet corner of the city was still safe and untouched by his violent night. What he saw instead jerked him to full alertness. The front window of Arya's diner was shattered, a jagged black hole in the glass. The neon sign was off, but the street lamp revealed spray-painted graffiti scrawled across the closed metal blinds of the diner. A crude black wolf's head. It was the symbol of the Castellano family. Luca's heart dropped into his stomach. He pulled over sharply and was out of the car in an instant, not even bothering to lock it. Cold dread and hot fury warred within him as he rushed to the diner's door. It was unlocked and slightly ajar, as if forced. Had Arya come down and forgotten to lock after discovering this? Fear spiked through him. Was she hurt? Was Nina? He stepped inside carefully, senses on high alert. The darkness was thick, but the street lamp's glow through the broken window cast enough light to see devastation. Tables overturned, dishes shattered on the floor, the lingering smell of spray paint and something acrid, gasoline. Thankfully, nothing seemed to have been set on fire, but it looked as though the intruders had considered it. A tipped gasoline canister lay near the counter. In the gloom, Luca heard a muffled sound. He froze, then realized it was quiet sobbing. "Arya?" he called softly, stepping over broken glass. From behind the counter, Arya emerged. Her face was illuminated by the weak light, pale, with tracks of tears on her cheeks. In one hand, she clutched a baseball bat, knuckles white around the handle. When she saw Luca, a gasp of relief escaped her and she lowered the bat, rushing around the counter toward him. "Luca!" she choked out. Without hesitation, she threw her free arm around him, trembling. "Thank God. I didn't know who else to call." Only then did Luca notice the faint glow of her cell phone lying on a nearby stool, as if she'd started to dial someone. He enfolded her in his arms instinctively, guiding her away from the debris. "I'm here," he murmured, heart pounding with concern for her. "What happened? Are you hurt?" Arya pulled back slightly, shaking her head. A lock of hair had come loose from her braid, falling across her face. Luca gently brushed it back, and she didn't flinch at his touch. "We're not hurt. Nina's upstairs with Mrs. Moretti, our neighbor. She slept through the noise. Thank God." Arya's voice was unsteady but gaining strength. "I came down when I heard the glass shatter. There were 2 men wearing hoods. They were trashing the place. One had that." She nodded toward the gasoline can. "Like they planned to burn us out." Luca's blood boiled. He clenched his jaw to rein in the rage. "Did they touch you?" he asked, struggling to keep his tone calm even as his vision swam red at the thought. "No," Arya said. "I think I startled them. I keep the bat by the door for safety. When I shouted and swung it, they ran out. One of them yelled something about a warning to keep Greco away, or next time they wouldn't be so nice." Her voice cracked on the name Greco. She looked up at him with sudden uncertainty. "That's your last name, isn't it?" Luca's stomach turned. In her terror, Arya had perhaps not fully processed that detail yet, but hearing it aloud, he knew the implications must be swirling in her mind. He had no time to explain now. First, he had to ensure they were safe. "It is," he said tightly. "And I'm so sorry. This is my fault." He surveyed the damage quickly, trying to assess immediate danger. The men were gone for now, but they could return with reinforcements or weapons. "They're from a group that has problems with my family. They must have seen me here and targeted your diner to send me a message." Each word tasted bitter because it was the truth he'd hoped to keep far from her door. Arya's face went through a storm of emotions in a heartbeat. Shock, confusion, fear, and then a flash of anger. "Who exactly are you, Luca? Why would criminals come after you here?" She wasn't naive. The pieces were clicking together. He saw the realization, forming behind her eyes, that he was not just a simple businessman. Luca opened his mouth. But before he could attempt an answer, Arya held up a hand, shaking her head as if to ward off the explanation for the moment. "No, you know what, I can't. Not right now. First I need to make sure Nina's all right and deal with this mess. We'll talk after." She was in shock, clearly. Luca knew pressing the issue now wasn't wise. Instead, he nodded. "Okay, let's get you upstairs. This can wait." He glanced around once more, ears straining for any sound of returning vandals. All was quiet except their breathing. Arya looked at the destruction with a heartbroken expression. "All my father's," she whispered, voice breaking as she took in the broken photo frames on the wall, the toppled chairs. Luca gently took the bat from her hand and set it aside. "I'll clean this," he said softly. "You go be with Nina." Arya met his eyes searchingly. Then exhaustion and trust seemed to win over her turmoil. She gave a small nod. "All right." As she turned to head toward the back door that led up to her apartment, she paused. She reached out and briefly grasped Luca's hand, as if needing the physical reassurance that he was real and there. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. Her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. Luca squeezed her hand. "I'll always come," he replied quietly, and he meant it as a vow. Once she disappeared upstairs, Luca moved with swift purpose. His calm belied the storm raging inside him. He righted tables and cleared an aisle to the window, crouching to examine the spray-painted symbol up close. The Black Wolf's head. Indeed, the calling card of the Castellano, family's enforcers, and the message yelled at Arya confirmed it. This was retaliation and a personal jab at him. He should have known. The moment he started spending time at the diner that he could draw danger to Arya and Nina, he cursed himself for being so careless. If anything happened to them. His fist clenched so hard a shard of glass bit into his palm. He hadn't noticed picking it up. With a grimace, he tossed it aside, and in one violent motion yanked the torn blinds the rest of the way down, ripping away the defaced fabric and tossing it in the corner. He needed to ensure they wouldn't dare come back. First, he locked the diner's front door and dragged a heavy table in front of it as a barricade. Tomorrow he'd hire someone to fix the window. But for now, this would do. Luca pulled out his phone. Stepping into a shadowy corner, he dialed a number, one of his crew, a trusted man named Pietro. When Pietro answered, Luca's tone was lethal calm. "Get 2 of our best to Arya's diner now. Unmarked car. I want eyes around this. Block until morning. Pietro." Didn't ask questions, he simply confirmed and hung up. Satisfied that some of his men would keep watch through the night, Luca returned to picking up the pieces. He was sweeping glass shards into a dustpan when Arya reappeared on the stairs. She had thrown on a cardigan over her blouse and her eyes were red but resolved. "You shouldn't be down here," Luca said softly. "It's not safe yet." "I sent Nina to our neighbor's apartment to sleep," Arya replied. Her voice was steadier now, but underneath it quavered with anger and confusion. "She thinks it's just a leaky pipe down here. I didn't want to scare her. The neighbor will keep her safe a while." Arya stepped closer, taking in the half-cleaned wreckage and Luca working there in his shirt sleeves. Tie loosened. The sight of him in this state, like some avenging angel amid chaos, hit her, but she steadied herself. "Luca," she began, crossing her arms tightly as if hugging herself. "I need you to be straight with me. This symbol, them knowing your name, you said it's your family's enemies. What exactly is going on? Are you—" she swallowed, forcing the words out. "Are you involved with the Mafia or something?" Her tone wasn't accusatory so much as desperate for truth. She clearly already suspected the answer and was bracing for it. Luca set the broom aside. The moment he had dreaded was here. He wouldn't lie to her, not anymore. She deserved the truth, even if it meant she'd never want to see him again. "Yes," he said quietly. "My last name, Greco. My family. We're one of the crime families in this city." Arya closed, her eyes as if wincing from a blow. She turned away for a second, pressing her fingers to her lips. "Oh God," she breathed. I actually let myself believe you were just some regular guy who'd been hurt, who needed a little kindness." "I am that," Luca said urgently. He skirted around to face her, needing her to see him. "Arya, I am someone who was hurt and needed kindness. That part of me is real. What I do, what I was raised into, it's only one part of my life. The worst part." She opened her eyes, and now tears did glisten on her lashes. "That worst part almost got my daughter and me killed tonight," she said, voice trembling with equal parts fear and fury. "I promised myself I'd never, ever get near that world again after what happened to my father. And here I am. Because Her voice caught and she looked down. "Because I trusted you." Those words speared Luca with guilt. He gently reached for her shoulders. "I never meant to drag you into it. I tried to keep it far from you." Arya stepped back out of his light hold, wrapping her arms around herself tighter. "But you didn't, did you? They found out. They came. If you hadn't just happened to drive by—" She broke off, not even wanting to speak the possibilities. "I'm sorry," Luca said, pain lacing each syllable. "Arya, look at me, please." She did, reluctantly, eyes flashing. "I will fix this. They won't touch you or Nina again, I swear it. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're safe." "How?" she demanded, wiping an angry tear from her cheek. "By killing them? By starting some war on my doorstep?" There was an edge of panic in her voice. "No," Luca said firmly. "No more violence here. I've already set men to watch the diner. We'll repair the damage. And I'll stay away if that's what it takes." He nearly choked on those last words. But if his presence put them at risk, then distancing himself would be the only way. Arya looked at him in silence for a long moment, conflict etched on her face. She cared about him. That much he could see, but fear was winning out. "Maybe that's best," she whispered finally, voice small. "At least until these people forget about us." About me and Nina, hearing the distance in her tone felt like ice water thrown over him, but he couldn't blame her. He nodded stiffly. "All right." His heart ached, but he steeled himself. "I'll make sure your diner is safe tonight and tomorrow. I'll have a crew here to fix everything. After that, I'll keep my distance." Arya's lips parted as if to say something more, but she stayed silent. Perhaps she was processing that he was really part of the world she hated most. Perhaps she wanted to scream or cry or both. Instead, she squared her shoulders and said, "Thank you for coming tonight. I do appreciate that. But I think I need you to go now. Pietro and the others—" She motioned to the two men Luca had stationed outside, who were visible through the ruined window, standing watch across the street. "They can handle things." The use of Pietro's name told Luca she recognized it, likely as one of the Greco henchmen from rumors or her father's old knowledge. Her father, the consigliere who tried to broker peace. Now, Luca being here must feel like history threatening to repeat. He couldn't stand the hurt in her eyes. Yet he nodded, accepting her wishes. "If you need anything at all," he said quietly, "you can call me. Day or night, I'll be there." Arya didn't answer, just looked away. The silence was heavy. Luca realized this might be the last time he'd stand with her like this. He swallowed. "Goodbye, Arya." His voice barely rose above a whisper. He turned and walked to the door, every step slicing at him because he could feel her not stopping him. As he moved the table aside to slip out, he heard her soft voice behind him, broken and full of sorrow. "Goodbye, Luca." He closed the door gently behind him and stepped into the cold night. The wind had picked up, biting at his face. Or maybe it was the sting of tears he refused to shed. He nodded to Pietro to keep guard, then walked to his car. Inside the dark vehicle, Luca gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady the tremor in his hands. The scent of Aria's diner still clung to his. Clothes, coffee and sugar, and a trace of her floral soap from when she had hugged him. That scent mixed now with the smell of gunpowder and smoke from the earlier raid on the warehouse, which lingered on him as well. The two worlds, as incompatible as oil and water, both soaked into him. He had tried to balance on the line between them, and now it seemed he'd fallen squarely back into darkness. He had protected them tonight, yes, but at the cost of losing Aria's trust. Luca took a shuddering breath. He had no time to wallow. Marco's words from the meeting rang in his head. A distracted soldier gets shot. And worse, a distracted soldier gets innocence hurt. He couldn't let that happen again. Resolving to end this war once and for all, for Aria's sake, and for his own, Luca started the car and drove off into what remained of the night, determined to find a way to protect the ones he loved, even if it meant destroying the only life he'd ever known. 2 days later, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Luca's penthouse living room, but he barely noticed the dying light. He stood at his liquor cabinet, a crystal glass of whiskey untouched in his hand, eyes fixed on a small framed photograph he had brought home from the ruins of the diner. He'd spotted it while cleaning. Up, fallen among shattered glass, but miraculously unbroken. In the picture, a distinguished man in his 50s with kind eyes. Aria's father, he knew at once, was shaking hands with a younger woman at some community gathering. The woman was olive-skinned with high cheekbones and dark hair falling in waves. Luca's breath had caught when he realized he was looking at his own mother, smiling warmly in that photo. It must have been taken shortly before both their lives were cut short. Luca recalled bits of a story now. His mother Maria had volunteered at a church in their old neighborhood, where she'd met a man trying to organize a peace sit-down between rival factions. That man, Aria's father, had been killed for his efforts, and not by the rivals, but by Carmine. Luca's uncle had seen peace as weakness and ordered, a hit on the naive consigliere, who dared challenge him. Maria, furious and heartbroken at the betrayal, had confronted her brother, Carmine, over the killing. 2 weeks later, she herself died in the explosion meant for another target. Officially, it was blamed on the rival family, but now Luca wondered darkly if it had truly been a stray retaliation, or if Carmine had quietly removed his own sister for becoming a liability. He wouldn't put it past the Don. The thought curdled Luca's stomach. These realizations crashed over him in waves. Aria's father died by his family's hand, his own mother possibly by the same. The cruelty and senselessness of it all made him want to scream. Instead, he downed the whiskey in one gulp, the burn barely registering. His phone rang, jolting him from dark reverie. He strode over to snatch it off the coffee table. It was Aria's number. He hadn't heard from her since that awful night. He had respected her wish and stayed away, though every hour since had been agony not knowing how she was coping. He answered immediately. "Aria?" Her voice on the other end was ragged, panicked. "Luca, oh God, Luca, she's gone. They took her. They took Nina." The glass in Luca's hand slipped and shattered at his feet. But he didn't even flinch. "What happened?" he demanded, heart in his throat. Aria was sobbing, trying to speak quickly. We were at the park by the school. I thought it was safe in daylight. I only looked away for a second and..." She choked on a cry. A man grabbed her. He threw her into a van. I ran. I tried to stop them. They pushed me to the ground, drove off. "Luca, they took my baby!" Her wail of anguish sent a bolt of pure fury through Luca. "Aria, listen to me," he said, forcing calm into his voice for her sake. "Did you see the men? The vehicle?" 2 men, masks, a black van, no plates. She was breathing hard, terror and guilt lacing each breath. One of them, he gave me a message. He said, "Tell Luca Greco if he wants the girl alive. Bring Don Carmine to Pier 27 tonight at midnight." Luca's blood ran cold. Pier 27, one of the docks the Castellanos operated. And bring Don Carmine? This was beyond a simple vendetta. This was a coup. In that moment, every suspicion Luca had about Marco's betrayal crystallized into certainty. His own brother had orchestrated this horror, aligning with the rival family to draw out their uncle and eliminate him, using an innocent child as bait. "I'm going to fix this," Luca said with quiet, deadly resolve. "I will get Nina back. I swear on my life." He said not to call the police, Aria whispered. voice trembling. I don't know what to do. I can't lose her, Luca. You won't, Luca vowed. You did right calling me. Now I need you to stay somewhere safe. Go to that neighbor you trust or somewhere public. Just hide until this is over. Arya was crying openly now. Please bring her back to me. I will, he replied, and his voice broke slightly. I promise you, Arya. They hung up. And Luca immediately dialed another number with shaking fingers. 1. He never thought he'd call. It rang 3 times before a terse male voice answered. Agent Monroe. Mark, it's Luca Greco, Luca said, already pulling on his coat. The man on the other end was an FBI agent who had once tried to recruit Luca as an informant years ago in exchange for leniency for a friend. Luca had refused back then, bound by loyalty. But times had changed. That offer you once made me, does it still stand? A pause. Luca, the agent said warily. This is unexpected. What are you saying exactly? I have evidence, books, records of every racket the Greco family's run for the past decade. I'll give it to you. I'll testify. But I need immediate help. A child's life is at stake. Luca's voice was urgent, the words tumbling out. He quickly relayed the essentials. A kidnapping orchestrated by a rogue faction, within his family and the rival's involvement. The rendezvous at Pier 27. Agent Monroe didn't hide his surprise. But he was a professional. If you're serious, this is enough to launch a major operation. But you'd better not be playing me, Greco. I'm done playing games, Luca said gravely. Just get your team to that pier by midnight. Come prepared for heavy firepower, and do what you want with the others. But the little girl must get out safely. She's only 6. Monroe's tone softened just a fraction. Understood. We'll extract the child safely. Luca, you realize what cooperating means. You're painting a target on your back from your family. Luca glanced again at the photograph of his mother and Arya's father on the table, and felt only resolve. They stopped being my family the second they threatened the people I care about. I'll see you at the docks. An agent? If anything happens to that girl or her mother, the deal's off. Without waiting for an answer, Luca hung up. Next, he had to ensure Don Carmine would be exactly where the kidnappers demanded. But he wouldn't be delivering his uncle to safety. He'd be delivering him to justice. Night fell on Chicago like a bruise, purple clouds gathering and spitting cold December rain. Luca arrived at the Greco mansion under the pretense of urgent news. He found Carmine in the study with Marco and a couple of lieutenants, discussing the fallout of the recent warehouse raid. Zio, Luca said, dripping water onto the marble as he stepped inside without ceremony. We have a development. I've located Vincent Castellano's hideout. He wants to meet tonight to negotiate. At Pier 27. Carmine raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. Marco, who lounged in an armchair, went very still at Luca's announcement. Pier 27, you say? Carmine repeated. Negotiate? Since when does that snake want to talk peace? Luca kept his face carefully neutral, hiding the storm within. He reached out through a proxy. Implied he wants to discuss an exchange. We have him on the back foot after burning their warehouse. Perhaps, Marco interjected, his tone skeptical. And you trust this information, brother? Sounds like a trap to me. Luca locked eyes with him. And for a split second he let Marco see that he knew. It could be, he said flatly. But if Vincent truly wants parley, Uncle, showing up could be our chance to end this feud for good, one way or another? Carmine considered, glancing between his nephews. Finally he thumped his fist on the desk. I didn't come this far to start doubting my instincts now. We'll go. If he tries anything, we'll be ready. He stood, reaching into a drawer to retrieve a silver-plated handgun, which he tucked into his belt. Marco got to his feet, feigning enthusiasm. I'll rally our best men. No, Luca said sharply, then tempered his tone. If it's a small negotiation, too many men will spook him. Better keep it lean, just us 3 and a couple of trusted guards. He could not risk a large-scale shootout with Nina's life in the balance and the FBI on their way. Carmine nodded. Agreed. Marco, you drive. Luca, with me. A tense half-hour later, 2 black cars rolled quietly toward the industrial harbor. Rain slicked the roads and beaded on the windshield. Luca sat in the back seat of the lead car with Carmine beside him. Marco drove in silence. Behind them, a second vehicle carried 2, veteran enforcers loyal to the Donner. Luca's heart pounded steadily as they neared. Pier 27. Stacks of shipping containers loomed in the darkness, lit here and there by sodium lamps that cast an eerie orange glow. The place looked almost deserted. Almost. As Marco parked, Luca could discern figures standing on the concrete dock ahead, by the water's edge. Through the wiper's sweep, he counted at least half a dozen men with weapons, and in their midst, a smaller silhouette. Nina. Luca's pulse jumped. She was there, tiny and unmoving in the grasp of a burly thug. He couldn't see her face from this distance, but knowing she was in the open, surrounded by killers, made him sick with fear. Carmine saw them too. "Bastardy," he muttered. "They have a child as hostage?" Luca forced a calm facade, leaning forward. "They know no honor, Zio. We'll have to handle this carefully." As planned, the FBI strike team was likely in position by now, hidden around the perimeter with scopes trained. Luca only needed to stall, until they moved in, but he hadn't been able to communicate with them since arriving, so timing was uncertain, and if a gunfight broke out too soon, Nina could be hurt. He had to play his part to perfection. The Grecos stepped out into the rain. Carmine and Luca walked side by side toward the meeting point, while Marco hung slightly back, one hand in his coat, no doubt on his gun. Carmine's 2 loyal guards followed a few yards behind, scanning the darkness. From the rival side, a tall, lean man with a wolfish grin stepped forward under a flickering lamppost. Vincent Castellano himself. He gave a mock bow. "Don Greco, so gracious of you to accept my invitation." Carmine bristled. "Cut the crap, Vincent. Using an innocent child to get my attention. Is that how low you've sunk?" Castellano chuckled, the sound echoing off shipping containers. "You and your kin never cared about innocence before. Why start now? Besides, I didn't lift a finger to grab the kid. That was all arranged by your blood." He tilted his head behind Luca. "Right. Marco." Luca's gut tightened. Here it was. Behind him, he heard Marco cock his pistol. "That's right." Marco's voice rang out, clear and venomous. "Drop your weapons, both of you! Now!" Carmine turned halfway, incredulous. "Marco, what the hell are you doing?" Betrayal hung thick in the damp air. Luca slowly raised his hands, casting a sidelong glance to see his younger brother aiming a gun at their backs. The 2 Greco guards in the trailing car had stepped out and, seeing the tables turned, froze with confusion, guns half raised. "Tell them to drop it, Uncle," Marco barked, eyes wild. Rain dripped from his hair into his eyes, but he didn't blink. Carmine's face contorted with rage and heartbreak. "You ungrateful snake? After all I've done for you? All you've done?" Marco laughed sharply. "You never intended for me to lead. It was always Luca, 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 the shining successor. I was a pawn, a convenient nephew to marry off for alliances maybe, but never your heir." Bitterness oozed from every word. "You're old, Zio, and your way of running things only leads to coffins. It's time for a new era. My era!" Vincent Castellano clapped slowly, clearly enjoying the family drama. His men kept their guns trained on Carmine's guards, who looked to their Don unsure of how to proceed. Carmine glanced at Luca, anguish in his eyes. "Is this true? Did you know of this treachery?" Luca shook his head slightly. "I only suspected recently. Marco hid it well." "Enough talk," Marco snapped. He motioned with the gun. "Kick your guns over to Vincent's men." "Do it!" Carmine's jaw clenched. Luca could see the calculation in his uncle's eyes. Carmine might be deciding whether to go down fighting rather than obey his turncoat nephew. But then Vincent's henchman pressed a revolver to Nina's tiny head. The little girl whimpered audibly, and Luca felt his heart nearly burst. "Don't hurt her!" Luca yelled, stepping forward impulsively. Immediately, 2 rival guns shifted to him. He ignored them, locking eyes with Vincent. "Let the girl go. She has no part in this," Vincent smirked. "Ah, but she does. She's leverage. As long as she's here, I'm certain none of you will try something heroic. Or stupid." Carmine raised his hands now, slowly removing the silver pistol from his belt and tossing it, skittering across the wet concrete. Luca followed suit, sliding his backup piece from his ankle holster and discarding it. Their guards, outnumbered, did the same. Lightning flickered in the clouds, illuminating the tableau of betrayal. The Don disarmed, the traitorous nephew behind him, and the enemy holding his great niece as hostage. Marco moved closer, joining Vincent. For a moment the 2 men shared a conspiratorial nod. Rival and turncoat, allied in greed. "Where's the evidence, brother?" Marco taunted Luca. You said you had the location of their hideout. Did you bring anything for proof, or was that just a ploy to lure dear uncle? Luca kept his face impassive. In his coat pocket, copies of ledgers and a flash drive rested, part of his deal with the FBI. He wasn't about to hand them to Marco. Instead, he spoke to Carmine. Uncle, the night our warehouse burned, Marco gave them the time and route, didn't he? He's been feeding Vincent information for months. I had to, Marco spat, not even denying it. Your war with them would have bled us dry or got us all killed. Vincent offered a partnership, split everything 50-50 once you were gone. The family gets to survive. Under my leadership, of course. Carmine's face had gone ashen, fury and grief in equal measure. I would never have handed my empire to a coward who conspires with kidnappers. You won't have an empire left to hand to anyone, Marco sneered. He flicked his gun toward Nina. Once you're out of the picture, I'll tidy up this loose end too. Can't have any witnesses, even tiny ones. Luca saw Nina's tear-streaked face then, illuminated by another flash of lightning. She was shivering violently in the gangster's grip, her eyes darting between the men in terror, searching desperately until they found Luca. When she recognized him, she sobbed, Luca! Luca, help! The henchman holding her clamped a hand over her mouth. Something inside Luca snapped. All his fear transmuted into pure resolve. He met Arya's daughter's terrified gaze and gave a single slow nod, hoping she understood it as I'm here. In that split second, chaos erupted. A crack echoed from somewhere high, a sniper shot. One of Vincent's men near Nina jerked and fell, a bloom of red on his chest. A split second later, an FBI spotlight blazed to life atop a warehouse crane, flooding the pier with blinding light. FBI, drop your weapons! Boomed a voice on a loudspeaker. Vincent cursed and fired wildly toward the spotlight. Carmine's loyal guards, seizing the distraction, dove for their guns on the ground and opened fire at the Castellanos. A fierce firefight broke out, muzzle flashes lighting up the rain. Luca's singular focus was Nina. In the confusion, the thug holding her had loosened his grip to draw his weapon. Luca sprinted forward with all his might, tackling the man and Nina together to the ground before the thug could hurt her. The man's gun went off, the bullet whizzing past Luca's ear. They grappled right beside the edge of the dock, waves slapping below. Nina rolled free a few feet away, crying, Crawl to me, Nina. Luca shouted over the din, keeping his body between her and the henchman. She obeyed, scrambling on hands and knees toward Luca, even as bullets rained around them. Marco, seeing his leverage slipping away, turned his pistol on Luca with a roar of rage. He fired just as Luca was hauling Nina into his arms. Agony ripped through Luca's left side. He felt the searing punch of a bullet lodging in his ribs. He staggered but did not fall. Shielding Nina with his own body, he pushed himself up. Luca! Nina screamed as she saw him bleed. He forced a grin through the pain. It's okay, Bunny, he gasped. I've got you. He spied cover behind a stack of crates and half-carried, half-dragged Nina there. Another bullet zinged by, slamming into the wood inches from Nina's head. Luca snarled in pain and fury. Marco was advancing on them, mad eyes gleaming with fratricidal intent. I should have done this from the start, he yelled, aiming to finish Luca off. Before Marco could fire again, a dark figure barreled into him from the side. Don Carmine, wounded in the shoulder but still formidable, had tackled his treacherous nephew. The two crashed to the wet concrete in a tangle. Luca hunched over Nina behind the crate. Over the child's terrified whimpers, he whispered reassuringly, It'll be over soon. Be brave just a little longer. He clutched at his side. Warm blood slicked his hand. The wound was bad, but he couldn't falter now. He peered around the crate. Vincent and a few of his men were in a losing battle against swarming FBI agents in tactical gear who advanced from all sides. One of Carmine's guards was down, but the other kept firing. The Don and Marco were brutally wrestling for the upper hand a few yards away. As Luca watched, Marco wriggled free from Carmine's grip and staggered up with a knife in hand. No, not just a knife. Carmine's own blade that he carried for close encounters. With a furious cry, Marco drove it downward. Carmine caught the blade with his forearm, snarling, but the distraction was enough. Marco wrenched out of Carmine's grasp and raised his pistol with his other hand, pointing it point blank at the Don's heart. Time slowed to a crawl for Luca. He had no gun, but Marco was about to execute his uncle, and likely would come for Nina and him next. Summoning a final burst of strength, Luca scooped up a fallen pistol from the ground. It might have been Vincent's. Kicked aside. Without hesitation, he fired twice. The bullets struck true. Marco stared down at the red blossoming on his chest in disbelief. His gun slipped from his fingers, discharging harmlessly into the ground. He stumbled back, eyes meeting Luca's one last time. In them, Luca saw a flicker of something, regret, or maybe just shock that his own brother pulled the trigger. Marco's legs gave out and he crumpled to the wet dock, blood mingling with rainwater in rivulets around him. Luca's vision swam. The world sped up again with a rush of sound, shouts, sirens, footsteps. "It's over, drop it," Agent Monroe's voice shouted. Vincent Castellano, seeing his plan in tatters, tossed down his rifle and was tackled by 2 agents. The remaining henchmen either lay wounded or surrendered, and Carmine's last guard wisely froze in place. Realizing the fight was done, Don Carmine knelt panting over Marco's lifeless form, clutching his bleeding arm. His eyes met Luca's across the chaos. There was sorrow there and perhaps a strange gratitude that Luca had saved his life even now. But then armed agents closed in on Carmine too, forcing him to the ground and snapping cuffs on his wrists. Luca let the gun slip from his grasp, raising his hands weakly as 2 agents approached him as well. His vision blurred at the edges. Nina was clinging to him, sobbing into his chest. He mustered his strength to hold her securely. "It's okay, Nina. You're safe now," he whispered, voice shaking with relief. Several agents had rushed forward. One gently pried the terrified girl from Luca's arms, wrapping her in a jacket. "We've got you, sweetheart," the agent murmured, carrying Nina to an ambulance that screeched to a halt nearby. Nina cried and reached for Luca as she was taken, but an EMT quickly joined to console her, checking for injuries. As soon as Nina was clear, Luca's adrenaline ebbed and white-hot. Pain surged through him from the bullet wound. His knees buckled. He collapsed onto his side on the rain-slick dock. Distantly, he heard someone shout, "Officer down! Medic!" Boots thudded on wood next to him. Agent Monroe crouched, peering at Luca's ashen face. "Stay with me, Greco. We're getting you help." Luca coughed, tasting copper. Each breath was ragged. He saw Carmine being hauled to a squad car, the old Don's face a mask of defeat. The Empire was done. Luca looked for Nina through the haze and found her safe by an ambulance. And his heart leapt. Arya was there, having just arrived, wrapping her daughter in her arms. How had she come so quickly? Perhaps she had followed at a distance, unable to stay away. Arya spotted him and her face contorted in fear. She started to run toward him, but an officer gently held her back until the medics could move in. Luca tried to lift a hand toward her, but darkness crept into his vision. The last thing he heard as consciousness slipped was Nina's shrill cry, "Luca!" and Arya screaming his name in a voice that would haunt him into oblivion. A beeping sound drew Luca out of a heavy darkness. He gasped softly as consciousness returned in pieces. Sterile air, a stiff bed beneath him, a deep ache in his side. He was alive. Blinking against bright white light, Luca realized he was in a hospital room, hooked up to monitors and an IV. The steady beep was his heart rate on the machine. Considering he felt a bit like he'd been run over by a truck, it was a wonder it still beat at all. He gingerly moved one hand to his bandaged torso, wincing. "He's awake," came a gentle voice from beside him. "Arya." Luca turned his head. Breath-catching, Arya sat at his bedside, looking pale and exhausted, but her eyes brimmed with unshed tears of relief. Nina was curled up asleep in a chair, her head on Arya's lap, clutching Mr. Hops the rabbit. It looked like they had both been through an ordeal. Arya's clothes were rumpled, and her hair loosely tied back. But to Luca, they were the most beautiful sight imaginable. "Arya," he rasped. His throat was dry, voice barely above a whisper. She pressed a finger to her lips and carefully rose, laying Nina's head on the pillow. Crossing to Luca, she took a cup from the bedside table and brought a straw to his lips. "Here, small sips." Cool water blessed his tongue and he swallowed, easing the sandpaper feeling in his throat. "Nina, is she okay?" he managed. Arya nodded, her face quivering between a smile and a sob. "She's okay. Scared, but not hurt." Her hand trembled as she set the cup down. Then she reached and very gently took Luca's hand in both of hers. "And you stupid brave man, you're going to be okay too." Emotion swelled in Luca's chest. He searched her face, hardly believing she was here, holding his hand after everything. "I'm so sorry," he croaked, eyes filling. For all of it. She shook her head quickly, and a tear slipped down her cheek. No, I'm the one who's sorry. I blamed you and pushed you away when you were the only one who could have saved us. You nearly died to keep your promise. Squeezed her hand with the little strength he had. I'd do it again. 1,000 times. At that, a sob escaped Arya. She leaned over and carefully laid her forehead against his, mindful of his injuries. They stayed like that, both a bit broken but sharing the same breath, the same tearful relief. I was so afraid I'd lost you, she whispered. You might have, he replied softly. But I think someone up there wanted me to come back. He flicked his eyes toward Nina. Sleeping peacefully now, maybe a little girl's prayers are hard to ignore. Arya kissed his forehead lightly, a feather touch that sent warmth through his cold limbs. Thank you, Luca, for bringing her back to me. For everything. He closed his eyes at the sweetness of her lips against his skin, fighting the burning in his eyes. I'm sorry I lied to you about who I was. You and Nina deserved better. She pulled back enough to look him in the eye. No more apologies. We'll have time to figure all that out. She brushed his hair back tenderly. Right now, I'm just thanking God that you're alive. Luca's heart felt too full to speak. He lifted Arya's hand to his lips and kissed it, hoping it conveyed the gratitude he couldn't voice. Just then, the door opened quietly and Agent Monroe peeked in. You are awake. Don't mean to interrupt. I just need a quick word, Mr. Greco. Arya straightened, wiping her eyes, but Luca kept hold of her hand, unwilling to lose that contact. Agent, he greeted, his voice stronger now. Monroe stepped in. Your statement can wait until you're a bit better, but I thought you'd like to know. Don Carmine and Vincent Castellano are both in custody, along with a dozen of their associates. We've got enough evidence to keep them there, thanks in large part to you. He paused. Word is spreading on the street that the Greco Empire's finished. The few soldiers left will scatter. Luca nodded wearily. It was done then. The violent legacy of his family. Over. And my end of the deal? You'll get witness protection, reduced charges, possibly no jail time at all given your cooperation and unusual circumstances. Monroe's stern face softened a bit as he glanced between Luca and Arya and the sleeping child. I'd say you've earned a fresh start. Arya closed her eyes in silent relief. Luca exhaled slowly. The tension of decades of living on the wrong side of the law slowly ebbed. From his body, a fresh start. It hardly seemed real. Thank you, Agent, he murmured. Monroe tipped his head. Not often we see a case close with so many lives saved. Take care, Mr. Greco. With a polite nod to Arya, he departed. Silence settled, punctuated only by the beep of monitors and Nina's soft snores. Arya turned back to Luca. A fresh start, she echoed, as if tasting the words. He studied her face anxiously. Arya, after everything I've done, do we still have a chance at that? At starting over together? She answered by leaning in and kissing him softly on the lips. It was a kiss filled not with passion or heat, but with promise and forgiveness. Luca's eyes fluttered shut as he savored the sensation, the gentle rain of Arya's love, washing away the last of his doubts. When she pulled back, her cheeks were pink. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I should have asked. Luca gave a hoarse chuckle and squeezed her hand. Never be sorry for that. You have no idea how long I've wanted to do that. Arya laughed quietly, pressing her forehead to his again. We'll take it one day at a time. It won't be easy. There are scars we both carry, but you saved my child. You saved me in more ways than I can count. I trust you, Luca, and She caught herself, smiling shyly. Luca felt a thrill in his chest. I love you too, Arya, he whispered, saying it was like a weight lifting, setting him free. Arya closed her eyes, a tear of joy slipping out this time. She nestled carefully at his side on the bed, mindful of his bandages, and Luca wrapped an arm around her. In the chair, Nina stirred, awakened by their voices. She blinked sleepily, and on seeing Luca awake, she sprung up and rushed to the bedside. Luca! She cried, trying to clamber up. Arya laughed softly and helped her onto the edge of the bed. Luca grimaced through the pain to sit up a bit and open his other arm for the little girl. Nina carefully hugged him, mindful of tubes and dressings. You're okay, she sighed in contentment, patting his shoulder as if to comfort him. I am, he whispered, kissing the top of her head. Thanks to you too. Nina leaned back to inspect him with a serious expression. Does it hurt a lot? I've had worse, he fibbed gently, brushing a tear from her cheek. I'm just happy. I get to see my two favorite girls. Nina smiled and snuggled against him. After a moment of blissful silence, she spoke up in a thoughtful tone. Mom? Yes, sweetheart? Arya said, playing with a curl of Nina's hair. Can Luca stay with us? Forever? Nina asked innocently. Arya and Luca exchanged a tender look over the top of Nina's head. Arya answered softly, Well, honey, that's up to Luca. He might not want to get sick of our pancakes every morning. Luca chuckled, his voice still raw with emotion. I think I could manage that. Nina seemed to mull something over. With a little furrowed brow, she said, If he stays, can I call him Dad? Is that okay? Arya gasped quietly, and Luca felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected the title, but hearing it made his heart swell. Only if you want to, he managed to say, voice unsteady. I would be honored, Nina. The child grinned, a brilliant, gap-toothed smile. Okay, Dad. She tested the word happily and threw her arms around him again. Luca's eyes closed as he held her, tears slipping free. Arya placed a hand over both of them, as if completing a circle. Outside the hospital window, snow had begun to drift from the night sky, dusting the city in white. It was nearly Christmas, Luca realized dimly. How fitting. A season of miracles and new beginnings. Months later, the bell above a quaint bakery door jingled pleasantly as Luca stepped inside, carrying a freshly cut pine wreath. The warm air smelled of vanilla and hope. It was early December in a new town. Upstate, far from Chicago's shadows, and an inviting sign out front read, Nina's Place, Bakery and Community Kitchen. Arya glanced up from the counter where she was arranging holiday cookies. When she saw Luca, a smile broke across her face that still made his heart flutter. You're just in time, she called. We need that wreath over the window. Nina was already by Luca's side, bouncing on her toes. Dad! Come see our gingerbread house. We made a huge one for the display. She tugged his hand, and Luca allowed himself to be pulled deeper into the cozy shop, chuckling. Sure enough, on a side table was an elaborate gingerbread replica of the bakery, complete with little candy people. 3 figures stood at the gingerbread door, a woman, a man, and a little girl holding hands. Luca felt a lump in his throat, recognizing the details Nina had insisted on. The woman had a tiny icing violin, an ode to Arya's musical past. The man a toy badge, Luca's new role mentoring troubled youth, symbolically, and the child had a stuffed rabbit. It's wonderful, Luca murmured, crouching to be eye level with Nina. She beamed proudly. Arya came to slip her arm through Luca's. She rested her head on his shoulder. There was contentment in her eyes now that eclipsed all the past sorrow. Together they looked out the window where light snowflakes swirled. The street beyond bustled with neighbors and friends, many of whom they'd gotten to know through the community kitchen they ran at the bakery, teaching cooking classes to local kids and providing free meals on weekends. It was a quiet life, but one filled with genuine connections and purpose. Luca hung the pine wreath above the frosted window, stepping back to admire how it framed their little family reflected in the glass. Nina pressed between them, her tiny hands in theirs. Remember what I said when we met? Nina asked suddenly, looking up at Luca with bright eyes. He smiled, remembering vividly. You told me not to cry because I could borrow your mom. Nina giggled. Yeah, but guess what? You don't have to borrow her anymore. Oh no, Luca played along softly, pulling Arya closer on his other side. Nina shook her head happily and proclaimed, We don't need to borrow a mom anymore, we have a family. Luca felt Arya squeeze his hand as tears of joy blurred the twinkling. Christmas lights for a moment. He scooped Nina into his arms, and Arya wrapped hers around them both. In the reflection of the window, they indeed looked like a family, a real family bound by love, and the trials they had overcome. And in that embrace, under the gentle glow of the new life they built together, Luca finally felt the peace he had sought for so long. The lonely Mafia man who had once sat crying on a park bench was gone. In his place stood a father, a husband-to-be, a man redeemed by love. No more borrowed comfort, no more solitary darkness. He had found where he belonged, in the warmth of Arya's eyes, the innocence of Nina's laughter, and the promise of every new day as part of a family he would never let go.